we're halfway through April, a little over at this point, and if we follow the past years, nothing outside of the upcoming season would have been much concern in the Call of Duty space. However, this year isn't looking like it's going to be like the last two. This year has the prospect to return us to that previous air quote normal cycle for reveals and such, predating Modern Warfare 2019's life cycle. What I mean by that is that previously in the April and May timeframes, we'd see the following games for the upcoming fall revealed to the world in that sort of window. Cold War and Vanguard were the only exceptions that we had here to this, due to the depth of Warzone and the fact that come March each year since, we'd end up seeing a major offering or a shift which would undercut a new game reveal. So with Modern Warfare 2 looking to potentially correct course here, it is very possible we're right on the precipice of a new teaser, reveal, or something pertaining to what many consider to be Modern Warfare 2, though not officially revealed as such. Today we're breaking down everything that we know so far in regards to Modern Warfare 2, ahead of when we may be seeing our first teaser or reveal over the course of the next few weeks, from all things campaign, to narrative, to multiplayer, and that third mode tentatively called DMZ. This is bound to be a longer one, so sit back, relax, and get your fill with everything that we know all in one location. As we go along, if you enjoy the video, do me a favor and drop a like on the video, and let me know what you guys are looking forward to the most out of this upcoming year's title. Campaign, multiplayer, the third mode, whatever the case, drop your thoughts down below. And if you're new to the channel, do be sure to subscribe button to stay up to date with all things Modern Warfare 2. We'll keep you up to date with absolutely any and everything you need to know, so if you'd like to stay up to date and join us on that road to 500,000 subscribers, I'd love to have you in the community. And finally, if you'd ever like to support the channel a little further, using creator code Espresso in the in-game shop of either Warzone, Modern Warfare, Cold War, or Vanguard is an entirely optional yet great way to do so. Do not ever feel pressured to, but if you ever do, tweet me a picture. I'd love to shout out some of your generous support in upcoming videos. That said, let's jump into it. So when it comes to official information, I'm talking official accounts like Activision, the Call of Duty socials, Infinity Ward. The first official confirmation of anything came from Infinity Ward's official Twitter account on February 3rd, following the Activision shareholders' revenue report. This time around, it was disclosed via a press release and not necessarily an earnings call, given the news around that time was the Microsoft acquisition attempt that was made a week before. So things were put out in press briefings rather than actual investor calls, but Infinity Ward simply tweeted, "A new generation of Call of Duty is coming, stay frosty." About a week later, though, we got more information stated that it's a sequel to Modern Warfare 2019. Both debuted in a preseason 2 launch briefing for creators and press, and on Twitter. In the first mention of it, about a day before it actually went live via Twitter, Pat Kelly, studio head at Infinity Ward, talked about the future of Warzone, but by proxy and the discussion of future plans for Warzone and Warzone 2, it needed to reference Infinity Ward's next project, to which it was then officially stated that Call of Duty 2022 is a sequel to Modern Warfare 2019, hence where the name of Modern Warfare 2, while not officially confirmed, is the logical conclusion to draw. It was also mentioned that the new game and Warzone would be designed together from the ground up, that there'd be a massive evolution of BR with all new play spaces and a new sandbox mode, and a new game engine powering both the new game release and Warzone. Those details came from behind the scenes at first, but then were later echoed officially on the Call of Duty Twitter account and Infinity Ward's own Twitter channels. Now, officially speaking, that's about all we've seen, and rightfully so. Infinity Ward, as the developers, and Call of Duty as a brand, want to keep this under wraps because the more first-hand info that you can drop out of nowhere with a reveal, the more potential to break the internet you have with an already hotly anticipated era, setting, universal lore, perhaps gameplay, and of course, as a follow-up to the most sold Call of Duty of all time. However, even if there's not much officially that we can look towards yet, that doesn't mean that we don't have plenty to go over, as probably evidenced by where we're at in the video and how much is still left. But before we do go into that kind of stuff, a fair warning that you should always consider when discussing leaks and rumors. Until things are confirmed officially, take everything with a grain of salt, as reports from rumors and leaks are of an active in development look at a game, and things are absolutely subject to change. So what is reported on at the time could have changed anywhere along the line from where it was reported initially, from 6 to 8 months out from the official launch. From here, though, we can break up the rest of the video into 4 different segments. Mainly 3, but 4 to be thorough. Campaign, multiplayer, the new third mode internally rumored to be named DMZ, and Warzone. Now, Warzone we're going to touch on a little bit more briefly, and we'll come back to in a little bit more depth later on down the line, talking about everything that we know about Warzone 2. But let's start with campaign. According to industry insiders and leakers Tom Henderson and Ralph's Valve, this year's campaign and story will be a little different perhaps from what you may expect if you're looking towards the Modern Warfare brand as a sort of story of conflict in a World War III scenario. Currently, it's rumored to be a more stealth and covert covert conflict with this game, trading out the tanks and armored infantry of Modern Warfare 2019 with more stealth outfits, rib boats, traditional vehicles, and more tactical gameplay nature. Alongside this, it's rumored that our Task Force 141 will be returning, but instead of taking on a global superpower or rogue warlord and his uprising militia, instead we'll be fighting a covert drug war with the Colombian cartels. When I think of this, and this is just me interjecting speculation, it kind of reminds me of the Sicario films. Now, this was first rumored and sort of deliberated on when tech conglomerate NVIDIA had its internal databases breached and users were able to view every single project logged in the hardware databasing, past, present, and future. Notably for us COD fans was one Project Cortez, developed by Infinity Ward and published by Activision. Now, if you've known any Call of Duty in the past 10 to 15 years, you'll know the odds of that combination of a game in development and being published by Activision not being a Call of Duty title is basically zero. The rumor here connecting this to the drug war was based upon the plot of Tom Clancy's Clear and Present Danger, where the storyline follows a similar covert drug war and the main villain, one Colonel Felix Cortez, Project Cortez. Makes you think. And this was then backed up with plenty of insider insight and information pertaining to the game. Actually, some of Ralph's earliest intel on this pertained actually to this in a number of different ways. He stated a few months ago that Infinity Ward's Project Cortez will depict the global campaign led by the U.S. forces to intercept Colombian terrorist-type organizations named for the Medellin cartel, taking heavy influence from Sicario. Now, for the campaign, he said there were new facets of companion interactivity where you'll be able to request and assist room clears during CQB operations. These new mechanics were put on show in a campaign mission, which he detailed a little later, saying that Task Force 141 and several other members of the domestic military have been tasked with infiltrating what's assumed to be a safe house cell holding information on drug lords. Now, this based in Juarez, they were trying to dismantle the upper echelon of the organization. You're allowed the option of deciding whether or not to go in guns a-blazing, ramming down the gate, or covertly go through the raid, but choices you make will determine who on your team dies. Another mission he detailed was that Task Force 141's vehicles are ambushed by heavy fire from an unknown position, and the character you're playing as is shouting out for his teammates to hand him a weapon. During the struggle, he is then shot, and you're tasked with grabbing his weapon before diving back behind cover of the armored patrol vehicle. This showing off some new character animations, some new player connection here, where your player will be trembling during ADS, panting, your weapon will jam, things like that. Now, he also said that we'd end up seeing comparable to Urzikstan based upon a real-world region, but fictional in its own right. This campaign would take place in a fictional district off the coast of Colombia. But then when we take a look at it overall from our characters on offer to some of the themes of the game, he ended up stating that Modern Warfare 2 sees Task Force 141 as a corrupt group of individuals. They aren't do-gooders, they're not liberators, they're instead wraiths operating in the moral gray, which is kind of how this sort of Spec Ops operation side of things has always been depicted within Call of Duty, where they have to toe the line between right and wrong, but sometimes it gets blurry. They ended up mentioning that there's a bunch of different themes here that you will end up seeing throughout the campaign. Shadow Company is going to be returning. I think at one point Ralph also mentioned that General Shepard would be returning. He was name dropped in the Modern Warfare 2019 campaign, but was not actually seen or playable, so that could end up influencing this a little bit. And finally, to round out the campaign information, Ralph ended up stating that the series is set to conclude currently with Modern Warfare 2, not making it to a full secondary trilogy, but instead wrapping things up with 2. Now, that is something that, if I may interject, I'm a little bit curious on. It seems like the setting is something that absolutely hits home with so many people. I don't know if that is something that just based right now with the future so uncertain with Call of Duty and the Microsoft acquisition, that's just something that they haven't planned that far ahead. They're not really looking towards it, that they could then write a third one if they need to, but right now it's interesting to consider. But that's campaign. Sounds pretty interesting, and honestly, as a story nerd, I'm very much so looking forward to the grit, the depth of this, and seeing our fan favorites in Task Force 141 and potentially other returning characters make their appearance and make their mark on the new storyline for Modern Warfare. But moving on to our second chapter here of this, multiplayer. I'm sure that a lot of people are really interested in this part, and it is something that there is quite a bit that has been rumored, leaked, and other ways to look at information. But when it comes to this information for multiplayer, this kind of stuff is normally a bit more reserved for later on down the line, but insiders from Ralph's Valve, the MWII Ghost, and the Ghost of Hope have all put out some information here in regards to it. As a baseline, Ralph had kind of mentioned that Modern Warfare 2's gameplay is most similar to Modern Warfare 2019, with the inclusion of several new and already existing features. A dev source that he had said that there's just more of it. So, as a rule of thumb, if you enjoyed Modern Warfare 2019's gameplay feel and multiplayer, it's looking like it'll be shaping up that that's kind of what you're going to see on offer again for 2022. But If you didn't, well, it might be a long year or potentially 2 here, so take that how you will. Now, starting out here with this in terms of just a general discussion about the game, this has been echoed by a couple of industry insiders. We'll come back to it. It was mentioned in a couple of tweets we'll talk about, but the game apparently is in alpha as of February. That means that right now it could be much further along, maybe into the beta stage, and that's awesome news to hear, especially whenever this was first mentioned back in February. As I feel like I always have to bring up here when we talk about the alpha version of a game, there's a lot of misconceptions around the term alpha. If you associate the term alpha with like basic poly design stick animations that act as player models, that's not exactly the case. Alpha is simply just the first draft of the final product. The best comparison I always feel like I have here is kind of like a term paper or an essay that you had to write in school. You had done all the research, you crafted the ideas, you kind of plotted how you're going to write things out, the flow of the writing is in place. What you have is a first draft that you can absolutely turn in and you could probably get a decent grade on, but it's something that whenever you have that time before you have to turn it in, you double, triple, quadruple check it however many times you want to add more, revise it, and things like that. That's essentially what alpha is in game dev. You end up going through the alpha stage here. It is very much so a product that could be presented to a playable audience, but it is something that also could end up having some fine tuning, like weapon values, character animations, polishing off any map or world bugs that you may see in the game. Alpha doesn't mean that it's unplayable, but rather it's just that first entry of the full product in a potentially live and acceptable state. So when a game is essentially completed and in that alpha state earlier rather than later, that's a good sign. That means that things are going pretty well in development. They haven't had any snags that hold them up or push the timetable for anything back a little bit. They're on schedule, or potentially even in this case, ahead of schedule from where they expect it to be out of that full 3-year developmental cycle. For comparison, Modern Warfare, rumored to be 2, is the earliest that I've personally ever heard of a Call of Duty game going into alpha. Modern Warfare 2019 was the last game that we had seen in the earliest of forms, with a playable build that honestly was really solid back in April of 2019. Myself and a bunch of other press and creators went out to Infinity Ward Studio before the reveal of Modern Warfare 2019, and we actually, alongside that, we couldn't talk about it for months afterwards. We actually got to play a couple of maps here in that sort of alpha build. Now, whether or not it lives up to your hype and anticipation, that's an entirely different story. As we mentioned, if you liked the feel of Modern Warfare 2019's gameplay, this might be a great sign here for you, but things like design intent and some of the fundamentals, that just might not line up with what you want to see. So it doesn't mean that it will be perfect come October, November, whenever the game launches by your standards. It's just the game is actually playable and ready to be presented, just needs ironed out a little bit. But when we get to the actual MP details, this is where the information comes from again, the MW2 Ghost and the Ghost of Hope. Both coming from sort of tweet storms that they put out at various different times, but let's start out with the MW2 Ghost tweets. He ended up saying that movement is faster than Modern Warfare 2019, but not as fast as Vanguard, so a little bit of a middle ground here for that. Map design is led with the concept of retaining the traditional Call of Duty experience while staying true to the nature of Infinity Ward's flair. Doors were seen on a number of maps, but of course, them being present or missing from the final build is not 100%. We won't see until we end up getting a playable demo or any sort of preview of gameplay. Map design is apparently going to be similar to DLC maps for Modern Warfare 2019. This is also echoed a little later on, as we'll talk about here, by the Ghost of Hope, but he ended up saying maps like Oil Rig, Condor Hideout, Sawmill, map designs like that, but with a brighter aesthetic. Combat pacing is seemingly planned to return, Classic and Blitz, which is subject to change, he said. That'll be an interesting one here. I liked Ground War, but at the same time, I also don't mind combat pacing as well. It kind of allows you to go up to Ground War, but sort of have a more stable variance of what number of players you want to go to, whereas Ground War could be anywhere from 12v12 at Ania Palace to anything like 32v32 into Vorsk District. So you don't really have the optional choice, you're just kind of thrown into that. So for that, it'd be kind of cool. UAV, Sentry Gun, Chopper Gunners, and Soundwave apparently are kill streaks that he has heard of. Soundwave apparently being something that distorts hearing, similar to an EMP but for audio instead of visual. He ended up saying the Classic minimap was in the game, but again, until something is seen in a playable demo, that is not confirmed 100%, though that again is echoed by what the Ghost of Hope ended up hearing, which is more up-to-date information from when the MW2 Ghost ended up putting out his. And finally, he ended up saying that the game looks remarkably polished for when he saw it in February. Now, that's something that again circles back to that alpha statement. pretty nice to hear. Now, Hope, on the other hand, ended up introducing a little bit more information here a couple of weeks, I forget if it was like a couple of weeks or a couple of months after this tweet storm from Ghost, but Hope ended up dropping some information that is definitely interesting to the overall feel of the gameplay itself. According to Hope, his first thing that he dropped was that Modern Warfare 2 will change how players approach picking perks with their classes. It sounds pretty interesting and not all that bad thus far. He later elaborated, saying that he's not going to give specific details on perks themselves, but the way that Modern Warfare 2 is approaching it is that you can choose 4 perks. This means that you get to choose 2 in the first column, 1 in the second, and 1 in the third. From what he was told, the first column is more of choosing your playstyle, and he then followed up by saying that you can't take that 2 perks in tier 1 and move it to tier 2 or tier 3. That perk tier 1 will always have the option for 2, whereas your second and third will be more so regular perks. Now, that seems interesting. We've talked about it here on the channel before. I don't really want to go too far into laying it out entirely, but it's very reminiscent to me, at least when I think about this, how Black Ops Cold War's campaign character creation went along. When you created your character within Black Ops Cold War's campaign, you could end up picking 2 perks that were essentially your bonuses for the overall campaign. Things like Paranoid would increase your aiming speed by 100%. Violent Tendencies would increase your bullet damage by 25%. Lone Wolf would increase your initial sprint boost duration, and so on and so forth. And you could choose 2 of those that would stick with your overall character for the entire campaign save. Now, obviously, that doesn't seem to be the case here, where every single game you play in MP, it will be like that, but you could set specific classes so that every time you play with that, you end up having those additional bonuses that kind of boost your overall soldier, not necessarily just other things that could pertain to elsewhere in your gameplay, like a restock or something like that. So that's definitely something that would be a cool twist on things. I'd be okay with seeing it. Stuff that more so complements your gameplay style rather than your actual individual life gameplay. So we'll see how that all works out if it actually comes to fruition. But then he ended up talking about the minimap a little bit further. Simply put, Hope stated that the classic minimap is indeed present in Modern Warfare 2. No perk necessary, no mode like Ground War specifically having that sectioned off for it, which is an absolute win in my books. I've said it before, it kind of sucks that we've gotten to the point where something as fundamental as just having a regular minimap with weapon firing pings on it, that's something that we consider a win, but I mean, I'll take it where I can get it. It's definitely nice that if this holds up, you won't have to sacrifice anything in your creator class, or you just won't have to resort to the compass or anything like that, like in Modern Warfare 2019. Hope also elaborated a little bit more on the sort of design intent for maps, stating that maps are indeed more of the classic 3-lane style. Think Cheshire Park, Condor Hideout, Gunrunner, Hackney Yard, Hovik Sawmill. This, again, I'm totally cool with, as we've talked about here in the past. I think that a lot of the base maps for Modern Warfare were great for tactical play. I think that, honestly, Search and Destroy is probably the best game mode here, especially right out of the gate for Modern Warfare, because of the way the map design was laid out for the majority of those. So if we can get more maps like Cheshire Park, Condor Hideout, Hackney, Gunrunner, and get away from things like Piccadilly, Peak, Euphrates Bridge, Ramaza, I'd be totally cool with that. Now, talking maps a little bit further here, kind of deviating a little bit outside of Hope's tweets, Ralph did end up stating that Modern Warfare's DLC, especially expanding into 2023 with that proposed gap year, there are plans to incorporate more remastered maps than previously intended. So maps from COD 4, Modern Warfare 2, and Modern Warfare 3, potentially at launch and then also throughout the DLC season, kind of compounding and adding on to things that were already planned. So that's definitely cool to see. My only hope with that is that we don't see it take away from anything that's brand new, but instead adding on top of it. Now, Hope, getting back to this, also mentioned that dolphin diving will be in Modern Warfare 2, but alongside sliding. So you have the option to do both, and it would be triggered by a design that was actually long proposed by the community, where holding your slide button would trigger the dolphin dive, but tapping it would trigger a slide. So honestly, I think that's kind of an intuitive way to really go straight forward and streamline multiple options here for how you can play the game, which is pretty cool. He also mentioned that Rose would be returning as an operator. Makes sense. Again, we talked about how Shadow Company is apparently going to have some sort of hand in the campaign. He ended up mentioning that there's no sprint to fire times in Modern Warfare 2, where you can sprint and actually be ADS firing at the same time, which is really curious. And then finally, he ended up mentioning that Last Stand was currently in Modern Warfare 2, but being that that was cut from Modern Warfare 2019, I don't know if that would necessarily leave the cutting room floor this time around. Hopefully not. Another big topic of discussion when we talk about multiplayer is skill-based matchmaking, which does potentially have some changes here up on deck. Now, as a baseline, skill-based matchmaking is in every Call of Duty. It's just whether or not it's more apparent than others. In classic Call of Duty games, skill-based matchmaking was there, but in the way of once a lobby was set by ping, it would then level the playing field by taking those 12 players or so and matching them up evenly because of skill-based matchmaking, stats historically on your account during that game. But with Modern Warfare 2019, through Black Ops Cold War and Vanguard, it's been way more present, it's been way more apparent, and it's something that isn't necessarily so much just lobby matchmaking, but instead has a goal of keeping you on the game longer. So while skill-based matchmaking is kind of accurate, it's more so retention-based matchmaking, engagement-based matchmaking, where if you're ending up having bad games, it will feed you some easier lobbies, and then vice versa. Once you end up taking advantage of those easier lobbies, you will start to get more competitive games, and then it'll start to learn your tendencies, where your breaking points are, and when you're about to get off, again, it'll start that cycle all over again. Personally, I've always kind of seen this as predatory, but Ralph ended up mentioning that there are plans to revise the skill-based matchmaking system for Modern Warfare 2. And he followed up by clarifying a little bit on that revision, saying yes, that it will be less debilitating. That Demonware, the studio involved in the matchmaking service and developing this kind of stuff, has had this particular system in R&D for a few years now. They're certainly against the idea of disciplining the better margined players. Now, whether or not this pertains to just Modern Warfare 2 or if it continues on afterwards, post Microsoft acquisition, if that goes through, he ended up saying that's where things become a little hazy, because overall, the analytical reasoning for this kind of stuff comes down to finding that fine line, where the purpose is to determine whether or not a player will leave a match or close the game entirely. So it's definitely something that is interesting, and we'll have to wait and see, but the potential for less skill-based matchmaking or strict skill-based matchmaking, I'm all for. I would totally take that being toned down quite a bit in Modern Warfare 2 and potentially Warzone 2. Now, finally, the last thing in terms of like mainline segments here for this video, DMZ, the third mode that we can talk about. Right now, that's the name that we have internally. It might not stand the test of time and be what it's actually called when it's released, but DMZ, short for Demilitarized Zone. Now, this mode, if insider reports are to be correct, has actually been in development for the past 4 years, predating even the launch of Modern Warfare 2019, which is pretty cool to consider. That this, in idea and execution, has been something that's taken perhaps the most time. Now, DMZ is currently slated to replace Spec Ops and in its place be something bigger. Spec Ops was 1 to 4 players doing large-scale operations with perhaps minimal replayability, whether or not that was for the objectives you had to do or the reward, whatever you perhaps are drawn away from it from, but DMZ looks to replace that and capture the attention a little bit further, and as we may mention a little bit later on, it looks to kind of serve as that content funnel before Warzone 2's launch, currently rumored to have a March 2023 release. So DMZ looks to fill that gap for about 4 to 5 months alongside traditional multiplayer introductions. Now, according to insiders, this is meant to be a more fleshed out cross-disciplinary component of the game to be a realistic survival shooter. Think kind of Escape from Tarkov. Your objective is supposedly just like Escape from Tarkov. Accumulate loot in separate maps, meaning multiple are rumored to be coming. From what I think I last saw it was 4 maps at launch, then successfully extract. Aptly described as plundering through the abandoned homes, buildings, vehicles, crates, and even corpses, each map's architecture varies between large land masses, vast city districts, and even small-scale towns with dimly lit one-to-one corridors. As described, that kind of reminds me heavily of the mission Cleanhouse from Modern Warfare 2019, where if you ever watched any of the behind-the-scenes development of that, the entire hit piece of that they wanted to really strike home with was one-to-one. Make it as realistic as possible to a real-world townhome sweep. But anyways, there will apparently be a number of extraction points across the maps, and if a player can meet the list of requirements, you'll seize and secure all the loot during those raids, heavily predicated though on the risk-reward scaling. Combat is definitely important, but if you're killed, you'll lose all your items which you originally entered with, so definitely want to be careful. An economy system apparently is in the works here to offer a basis allowing complex deals for players to take part in, and that the gunsmith will also have a point-based purchase system where attachments and caliber adjustments can be made through that in-game currency system for the mode. According to Ralph, gameplay is considerably slower, and if I were to interject my own speculation here, I think that'd probably be due in part to the nature of your looting, i.e. if you have like an expanded backpack, you're carrying more things, so you're obviously going to be weighed down in movement speed. He also said that there's a large emphasis on armor, also potentially playing into why you may be slower. More armor weighing you down. And the loadout is important. He mentioned a mode called Heist Windfall in development, which also looks to be a limited time mode, but you'd see yourself wagering more items for a chance for larger sums of cash and loot upon extract, with those extraction loads though being considerably larger in what you need to do and longer in terms of duration, as well as the AI being tougher. And speaking of AI and players, Ralph laid out that the mode looks to be 20 to 35 players in size, mixed with real players, but also additional AI adding to exceed that 35 player count, making it much more in depth than what we saw with Spec Ops, which is pretty cool. PvPvE on a larger scale, and it's likely to launch, as Ralph said, in beta, which means that it'll hopefully get more attention and hopefully quicker updates, adding more things here to it where it doesn't have to adhere to one particular content cycle. Now finally, in terms of details, Ralph ended up mentioning that it was going to launch with solos in mind, but duos, trios, and quads would be launching later on. Kind of similar to how Warzone launched trios only, and then solos, duos, and quads came later. Now, one thing that I don't know if it'll hold up or not is that it was also mentioned this would be an independently existing mode, rivaling the base multiplayer experience, which would be kind of wild if true, but I'd be all for it. That doesn't mean free to play and standalone, but it means that it'd be a sort of point of drawing players in, and they want it to be a focal point that lasts throughout the year. And the way that I kind of see this is kind of in the same vein of how Ground War was handled within Modern Warfare 2019. That mode, from a technical standpoint, was kind of testing the stability of higher player counts so that Warzone could be a thing later on down the line. But in terms of marketing, a lot of people thought this was to primarily capture Battlefield's audience, larger scale combat, but in Call of Duty. So who's to say they're not targeting that survival shooter genre of Tarkov? I think that it's definitely possible, and I'm definitely interested to see if this can stand on its own two legs and start walking where Spec Ops didn't really. Now, outside of that, the only other details here for this is that it's currently rumored that we'll see some level of storyline structure and continuation outside of the campaign, just like how we saw the narrative in Modern Warfare 2019 continue from campaign into Spec Ops and then finally into Warzone. It seems like that narrative thread will continue with this year's installment, and I'm absolutely all here for that. Now, outside of that, that's really all we have here in terms of campaign, multiplayer, and DMZ so far. Warzone, again, there's really not a whole ton to go into right now. The big thing being, though, that it's right now rumored to be launching in March or spring of 2023. So from October or November, when the game actually launches, to when that happens, we won't really be seeing a whole ton in terms of Warzone involvement until that next launch. So whether or not that means integrations are happening at all for Warzone 1, we don't quite know, but it is going to be a big question mark that we'll expand upon in another video. Now, outside of that, other intel pertaining to Modern Warfare 2 in particular, right now it's believed that we'll see both last generation consoles and current generation consoles included with this. So PlayStation 4 and 5, Xbox One, Series X and S, as well as PC. Additionally, Modern Warfare 2's budget is reportedly in the $250 million to $300 million range. So expect to see lots of advertising this year, and it's very possible that that accounts for a longer duration of advertising, meaning that maybe we are just a week or two away from our first teasers here and when things will start to ramp up. So those first teasers rumored to be the end of the month, just a few weeks at this point, and then also a reveal in May. That would be pretty cool. And talking in terms of timing of that, again, a teaser could happen at any point. The end of May, right now it's rumored around May 30th, which would be pretty cool to see that happen if a reveal actually does go down then, because that'd be the exact 3-year mark for when Modern Warfare 2019 actually ended up getting revealed to the world. And finally, in terms of a launch, right now it's rumored October sometime, but again, that is subject to change. But that said, that is everything that we've heard so far about Modern Warfare 2. Coming back to the very beginning here of this, if you've made it this far, do bear in mind, this is all subject to change. Take it all with a grain of salt. This is rumors, leaks that we've seen, but until anything is officially confirmed, we don't have any definitive way to know for sure if it's 100% or not. So that said, that's where we're at, and that's where we're going to wrap it up. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. You guys are absolute legends, but hopefully it's proved insightful. Hopefully it's allowed you to see everything that we see within Modern Warfare 2 right now, all in one place. So let me know your thoughts down below. Is there anything in particular you guys are really looking forward to with Modern Warfare 2? Anything that you're really skeptical on? Whatever the case, drop your thoughts down below. But if you enjoyed the video, do me a favor and drop a like on the video. And if you're new to the channel, do be sure to subscribe button to stay there with all things Modern Warfare 2. We will keep you up to date with any and everything you need to know regarding the upcoming game. So stick it here if you guys are at all interested. But for now, thanks so much for watching. Mine has been Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.